Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study. We live once again. I want to thank everybody that is joining here live. I'm still trying out a new system, so pardon me if it's a little glitchy. I'm trying to figure out how to get better information on my comments. We'll see if I can figure that out. Anyway, again, my name's Paul Engel. I am glad you could join me. We'll get started with today's content in just a minute. I do want to send you over to that website, though, constitutionstudy.com. That's where you'll find everything I'm working on. You'll see, all these videos and the articles that you can share with others. There's an audio podcast. You can find me on YouTube and Facebook, but the website, constitutionstudy.com, that's really the central hub for everything I'm working on. It's also the hub of information that you can use. I encourage you to head over there, check out these videos, leave comments. You can ask a question on the website. You can request I speak to one of your groups, whether in person or like this over the internet. We can make it happen. We have the technology, and I think it's a wonderful thing. Most of all, I love when you ask questions. I love when you're looking for information about the constitutional point of view of certain things. So I'm hoping that you will continue to do that. And I just realized I have to fix something here. You know, that's the one problem with doing things live is sometimes you have too many things going on at once. And I just realized I don't have my notes up. And while I'm pretty good at this, I like to have my notes or things don't seem to work real well. So let me see if I can get this working here. There we go. Also, being this is a live Q&A, it's live, so hopefully it's a Q&A, meaning I hope you'll put your questions in the comments. Hopefully I will be able to watch and track them and answer them on Facebook. If I can find my mouse, where did my mouse go? I lost my mouse. There we go. So hopefully I'll be able to find and track. See, technology is wonderful. It's hidden my mouse. My mouse doesn't seem to want to work, so I have to see if I can figure out what's going on here. Anyway, I appreciate the patience as I'm trying to find the best system I can to give you the best content I can for the time you give to me. Also, while I'm thinking of it, while you're on the website, head over to the newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter. I send one out once a month, letting you know what's going on, what's the news with the Constitution Study, and where you can find more information. I also, there's a little checkbox there. It says, send me your posts. So whenever I post content like this on my recorded videos, when they hit the website, they will automatically be emailed a link to your email. No worrying about Facebook algorithms, no worry about YouTube algorithms. I'll just send you an email, make your life easy. Because I don't know about you, I like making my life easy. So we'll give that a shot. Anything else going on? Like I said, questions. I want you to place your questions. One of the things I've noticed in the last several live streams, they've been lightly attended, and I haven't gotten a lot of questions. So put them in. Sooner or later, I'll figure out how I can actually look at your questions here live and in real time, and then maybe I can answer them as they're coming up. But for some reason, Facebook just doesn't like to. Facebook just likes to give me a hard time. Let's see, what if I check over here? You know, every time I think I've got this worked out, hey, there we go. Look at that. Look at that. No worrying about Facebook algorithms. Whoops. No worry about I got you going. I need to hush you up. I got too many things going on here. What I want to do is I want to have this where I can do them all interacting. Okay. Let's get back to what I was talking about here. Now, today's content deals with actually something that's going on, what I call to as reviewing federal largess or federal goodies. Now, by now you should know that I love it when states, the ones that actually created the federal government, well, they take their creation and they put it back in that little box they created for it. When the states created the federal government, they gave it certain enumerated powers. They said, this, it, no more. And I love when they put it back in its box. And now my adopted home state, the good old volunteer state of Tennessee, it's joining the party. And I'm glad to hear it. Now, I've written before about the federal government trying to bribe the states to do something or to enact some form of legislation. This is nothing new. I found out that in early February of this year, 2020, legislation was introduced into both houses of the Tennessee State Legislature. In the Senate, it's called SB 2055. In the House, it's House Bill 2831, that would require their approval before any state agency could contract to accept a block grant. Well, let's start looking at these, see if I can, how am I supposed to share my screen if it won't show me this stupid, hang on here. There we go. Haha, success. Let me share. I do have some quotes I want to share with you because it's not just me. I want you to recognize when I'm quoting something and where I'm getting it from so that you can double check my work. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that a little later. But let's take a look at what these block grants are. Now, I went to dictionary.com and I used the modern dictionary because it's a modern term. And it defines block grant as a consolidated grant of federal funds formally allocated for specific programs that a state or local government may use at its discretion for such programs as education or urban development. Now, starting back in the 1970s, block grants were used in an attempt to consolidate the numerous federal programs of different agencies. Now, then President Nixon, he proposed consolidating 125 different domestic assistance programs into 6 block grants. Now, forget the waste and overhead. What the president was looking to do made a little bit of sense. And while many of his proposals were rejected by Congress, 3 block grant programs were created. Now, since these creations are consolidations of several grants from several different programs, the states have some discretion on how to use the monies they receive from these block grants. Well, within the boundaries of the block grants themselves. For example, a state could take money from a child welfare program and use it for child welfare, but they couldn't take it and use that money for, say, road repairs. Now, according to the Congressional Research Service, there are 23 block grant programs with over $58 billion, with a B, billion dollars in appropriated funds just for fiscal year 2020. So if the federal government is just giving the states money, what do we need this legislation for? Well, quoting from Senate Bill 2055, Section 1, quote, "Notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, no state agency shall enter into or renew a contract or other agreement with the federal government for the receipt of a federal block grant unless the contract or other agreement is approved by the General Assembly as evidenced by the passage of a joint resolution originating in either house." You see, if you've ever heard the term, "he who pays the piper calls the tune," well, then you should know why you should never simply accept free money, because nothing is free. And free money almost always comes with strings attached. And if it's coming from the federal government, it always comes with strings attached. So before any state agency in the state of Tennessee enters or renews a contract, the representatives of the people should approve it. I mean, after all, if a state agency enters into a contract with the federal government to accept money, there is an expectation that the state will have to spend that money on something the federal government wants. For example, I found that participants in certain housing and urban development block grants are required to identify impediments to fair housing and take action to mitigate them. You see, in effect, these block grants give the federal government undue influence over state housing laws. That is, if the states want the money. Now, in Tennessee and probably in most states, although I haven't read all their constitutions, state agencies cannot spend money without an appropriation made by law. I'm just double checking something here. Okay, yeah, sorry. So from the Tennessee Constitution, Article 2, Section 24, quote, "No public money shall be expended except pursuant to an appropriations made by law." Now, do you understand why I refer to grants as bribery? See, what we have is a federal government bribing state agencies to violate both the state constitution and state law in order to get an outcome that the federal government wants. Now, if we go back to Webster's 1828 dictionary, we read that bribery is the act or practice of giving or taking rewards for corrupt practices, the act of paying or receiving a reward for a false judgment or testimony, or for the performance of that which is known to be illegal or unjust. It is illegal or unjust. Remember that. It is applied both to him who gives and to him who receives the compensation, but appropriately to the giver. Now, 2 Tennessee state legislators want the citizens of the state to have a say by their representatives in any block grant money a state agency may accept. They are attempting to start the process of putting the federal government back in its little box. Now, this would return the states as parties to the compact that is the Constitution to their role of masters of their creation. It returns the states' control over the federal government. You see, this is more than just the Tennessee legislature trying to flex its muscle. By agreeing to enact rules and regulations without the force of law, with the force of law, without going through the legislative process, these state agencies are bypassing the lawmaking system. In other words, it's illegal. They are violating the state's constitution and the oaths they took upon assuming office. It's bad enough that the federal government has created these illegal agencies and then given them the authority to bribe and manipulate the states to do their illegal bidding without the states encouraging them through their compliance. You see, we the people, we should be holding our elected officials, our elected representatives, our agents accountable for their violations of the supreme law of the land. And we, the citizens of the great state of Tennessee, we should be standing with our representatives in Nashville. They should support this simple and reasonable legislation. And if they don't, they should be hearing from us. But if they do, we should be standing with them and supporting them. Now, will SB 2055 and HB 2831 get rid of federal bribery? No, not in the slightest. But at least it will give the agents of the people, not the unelected bureaucracy, a say in how we deal with some of it. Bribery has 2 parts, and both the giver and the receiver are guilty. It's well past time we start dealing with the receiving end of this bribery chain. Now, it won't be easy. Many of those in the state agencies and the citizens of the state, well, they've traded their rights and their liberties for the pottage of federal money. We have to decide if we wish to be a free people or a bought and paid for people. We have to decide if we want the American Republic to endure or not, recognizing there will be pain and there will be difficulty either way. But if we do not stand up to the free money from Washington, D.C., we will one day find it was much more expensive than we thought. We should never forget what Alexis de Tocqueville said. Let me show you here. There it is. The American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the public with the public's money. See, much of how Washington gets what it wants is through legislation. Much of it is through bribing the states to do what the federal government can't do. And I'm loving the fact that my new state, my adopted home state of Tennessee, has decided to stand up and say, no, we want to have control over what happens in our state, and that includes the agencies taking money. I see we have a couple people joining in. I'm glad, and it's an important point. It's a small step. It only deals with block grants, which is a relatively small piece of the pie. But I'd rather take a step in the right direction then continue to drift in the wrong direction. So if you live in Tennessee, let me know, hit the chat, hit the comments. What do you think? Were you aware of these bills, and what do you think about them? And are you willing to stand up and say, yeah, I want these bills supported. I want my representatives determining when we're going to accept money from the federal government because it has strings attached. And if you don't live in Tennessee, are you going to take this language and send it over to your legislator, say, hey, can we do something like this? I actually have links to the legislation in the article on the website. So when this comes, it'll be posted on Monday. So either getting the email if you signed up for the newsletter and check the checkbox, or check the website on Monday, and you'll find out. You can take that legislation, you can email it to your representatives in your states and start saying, it's about time we stop letting the state agencies bypass the legislature when it comes to taking money and spending money. So let me check here. I don't see any questions coming up yet. I want this to be, these live sessions to be a bit more Q&A. So I'm really gonna encourage you, post a question. It doesn't have to be a question about the topic at hand. If you have another question you want to discuss, this is the time to do it. I really want to make these interactive Q&As as much as possible. I'm debating how much effort to put into these. You know, if this is just another recording that you watch and maybe comment a little bit, maybe that's not the best way for me to go about doing this. But if we can really start an interactive engagement, I'm really hoping to do that. I'm looking at a couple of other things as well, putting on some webinars, maybe some more structured webinars, some maybe less structured webinars. That's kind of my goal for this year. Is I want to really, in addition to getting the book out, in addition to getting some of the classes stood up, I want to focus on making sure the content I'm delivering is really something that is helpful to you. I want it to be more than just entertainment, and I don't want it to be an echo chamber. And I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, was it last week? No, it's a little over a week ago now. It's almost 2 weeks ago. I was at a conference in Nashville. Nashville's pretty much my hometown, so it was a convenient conference to go to. And I did a session on the presidential elections. And there was a discussion. Of course, we've got a presidential election coming up. Of course, the question about political parties came up and primaries and all of that. And at the end of the session, someone stood up and they made a comment about moral equivalence. And I actually, it was not a mean comment. It was a comment. And he actually came to my booth afterwards and we discussed it. And it was a lively debate. It wasn't mean or aggressive or aggravated or chest pumping. It was a good, we have different points of view. And it was, in fact, so engaging that I actually wrote a video. I recorded a video based on that conversation. I think that's going to come out next Thursday. And the idea of moral equivalence between the parties and all of that. That's the type of engagement I like. So I don't mind when you challenge something I've said, as long as you do it respectfully and with facts. Too often I get challenged with people who like to do the shouty all caps and make assertions that aren't supported by the facts. I will deal with those and I try to deal with them calmly. But I really love when someone just comes in and we can really have a discussion and a debate. Okay, a couple of updates about what's going on, but again, not a question. I'm looking for questions. Come on, I've only got a few people. We got about half a dozen people out there now. How do I get more people? Maybe that's another question. How can I get more people engaged? I want to thank, by the way, the Constitutional Grassroots Movement. I always get that name wrong. The Constitutional Grassroots Movement and Restore the Intent for allowing me to share this content, my content, more broadly. So if you're a member of one of those groups, either the national group or the state groups, you will start seeing my videos pop up in your group feed or on those pages. Those are wonderful. If you have other content you would like me to syndicate to your location, to your sites, great. How can we spread the word? How can we get more people engaged. And I understand maybe this is the wrong time of day. I picked this base when I first started as a good time for a couple of reasons. Is there a better time of day? Is there a better day of the week for doing these events? Let me know and I'll consider it. I'm open to ideas. Etta, she talks to a representative and gets pat and standard answers. Yeah, I have the same problem with my federal rep and my federal senator, and it's not uncommon. Right? The political system has been focused so much on party that people don't matter. And I'll tell you what I did that seems to have made a difference. When I first moved to Tennessee, I was here a few months, and I called up my state rep and my state senator and said, I want to sit down and talk. And of course, the scheduler person goes, okay, what do you want to talk about? I says, I don't know. I'm new to the area. I want to know what is important, what my state representative thinks is a big deal for the next year. I just want to sit and talk. And I actually ended up with a meeting with both my state rep and the state senator, and I brought my daughter along, and we sat around a conference table and we talked about what was interesting. What were the big deals? What were the big issues they saw on their plate? Now, a couple of things have come from that. One is my state rep, if I contact him, I can send him an email and I get a real human answer. I mean, I don't always like the answer. They may be a little pat sometimes. I get a real human answer. If I call him, I can actually talk to a human being and have a conversation about this. And I try every year to meet with him when he's in, I generally try to meet with him when he's in the Capitol, although I'll meet with him anywhere because he's local. I don't have the same travel issues as some people in their states. I live about an hour from my state capital, so that's not a big deal. But it's that personal relationship, it's that face to the name that helps get you through that first level of the pat and standard answer. At least that's what I've found. I think the other thing to do is when you contact your representatives, there should be 2 reasons you contact your representative. All right, there should be 3 reasons you contact your representative. One is, like I did, I want to know what is on your horizon. What are the big legislative things you see coming down the pike? I want to know about them so I can be informed, right? That's good. Second, well, you should be contacting them when there is legislation that is bad, that is unconstitutional, that's illegal, that's wrong, that's bad. You should be contacting them and having a conversation with them. But that conversation is important. See, when I contact my legislator, I usually don't start out with, this is bad legislation and why. Right? I usually start with, I want to talk to you about, House Bill such and such, and what is your position on it? And if I think they have the wrong position, I ask them why. And I think there's a very important trigger that happens in the human brain when someone gets asked why. Now, sometimes the why is a very pat answer, but it shows that you're open to the consideration that maybe they've got a position that makes sense and maybe you're wrong. Now, then you can have a discussion about, well, is there a reason why a good one? Why is the legislation bad? But you've now initiated a conversation, not a conflict. And you have to remember that most of the times these people are contacted, it's either by lobbyists who want something or people they represent, constituents who are angry about something. So you end up with a conversation. And I think that I have things I disagree with my representative, but we can have a calm discussion about them, and I can help educate him in the areas I think he's wrong without starting a fight. And I think that helps a lot. Then the third type of conversation you should be having, and it's one we often forget, is you should be contacting your representative when they vote for good legislation. If they vote for something good, like this House bill, if this comes up and my rep votes for it, I need to contact his office. I need to thank him. And if I can do it, not just to their office, right? You call them up, you get an office person, that's fine. If you can meet with them, if you can encounter them at the Capitol or at their office and say, thank you, that was great, I really appreciate it. Now, and what else can we do to get this type of legislation passed? Now you're a face and a name more than just a name. And they are more likely to give you an answer if they know, A, you're not going to settle for a pat answer, and if they know that they're not going to get beat up if they give you the answer that you don't like. Let's see. We have no representatives in New York, everything falling on deaf ears. Well, Bobby, I certainly know how you feel. Well, this is interesting. It lays out kind of strange. All right. Bobby thinks the content's pretty good. Maybe it's about how do we get this in front of more people? That's what I want to try to do. What can I do? I'm considering setting up a couple of webinars. They would not be done through Facebook. They would require registration, but they would not require any money. They'd be free webinars to discuss some topics. I wanted to talk about the presidential election and the Electoral College because we're in an election year. So I think it's an important topic to discuss. That might be something that we discuss and talk about. But how can we get more? I would really love that. And take it from there. Bobby also says that we have no representation in New York. Everything falls on deaf ears. Bobby, I believe we chatted after last month's sessions. I know where you live. I used to live there too. I know exactly how you feel. That's one of the reasons why I'm no longer a citizen of the empire. Because even when I had legislatures that listened, can't remember the state senator's name before I left. She was a very nice lady. I actually worked with her office on some legislation and had moderate results. I mean, it was not as good as I would have wanted, but it's better than it could have been. But yeah, it went absolutely nowhere. It's the consequence of living in a state where people want to be ruled. They want to live in an empire. I make fun that, if Tennessee's a volunteer state, New York is the empire state, and it's run like the Roman Empire. And the more I look at it, the more I see that's the way it's run. So I feel for you, Bobby. The only thing you can do is continue to work harder. Well, I think the only thing we can legitimately do is help educate people so they'll make better choices in their representatives, and maybe be more interested in liberty than in being taken care of. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and someone made the comment, there was a Star Trek episode in the 60s where Kirk had to choose between being free or being taken care of, having everything provided for him, and he decided for free. He chose freedom. He chose liberty. I think if they were to do that today, he would choose being taken care of. And I think that's a very important point. And I think what it really takes is education. And it's going to take time, and it's going to suck because it's going to be hard work. But hopefully, as people start realizing that all this free stuff they're getting costs them everything they have, and I don't just mean money, then maybe things will change. Yeah, Etta, you're right. You're going to get better responses from your state rep. And there's actually a very important point. There's a reason why the government was set up so that the states, the entities closest to the people had the most power. There's a reason why the federal government was supposed to have very little power focused on foreign affairs, on foreign objects, not on domestic objects, because domestic things were supposed to be something you had an impact in. So yes, you're going to see more traction from state reps. It doesn't mean you give up on the federal reps, but also remember this: most of the federal reps and senators were state reps and senators at one time as well. So that's a good point. Let's see. So Bobby, I'm gonna quote some of this because it's in the chat and everybody can read it. But we've lost control two huge corporations, the RNC and the decent, choose the candidates, manipulate the primaries, and change things around to make sure. Absolutely. In fact, that's the discussion I had that started my little tete-a-tete at the conference. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are private companies. They're private organizations. They are not an NGO. They're not part of the government. They have no constitutional role. But what they've done, and this is an interesting point, they have manipulated the states into how they run elections. And in fact, shameless plug, I have an insider group I'm building, and one of the first lessons that's going to be up there is called Presidential Elections in the Electoral College. And I talk about the election process and about primaries and how basically these private corporations had convinced the taxpayers of the states to pay for their elections. It would be like having Walmart or the NAACP go to your state capital and say, we want you to pay for our board elections. It's really kind of nuts. But again, it's not just it's just not the way we're taught, and that's part of the education process. Yes, they and the parties are designed to maintain control. So yes, they've set up the primary system to pick their champion and not give you a choice. They intentionally limit your choices, and then they say, you just have to hold your nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, which means you get evil. And it keeps third parties and independents from having any real shot at the presidency. But then again, the presidency doesn't have any real power anyway. You see, if you look at the actual constitutional role of the president, he's commander in chief, but it's the Congress that determines the rules that actually funds the military and sets the rules and regulations for it. He's just a supreme general. He can appoint justices and other officers, and he can sign treaties, but those are with the advice and consent of the Senate. See, as bad as the DNC and the RNC have taken over the presidential elections, the president office wields so much power because our representatives, the members of Congress, have abdicated their responsibility. They said, we're not going to do the hard part of really passing detailed legislation. We'll just throw some general ideas out and we'll create this federal agency to go do the hard work for us so we can blame them. So I really wouldn't care. In fact, basically until probably, I don't know, I would say the early 20th century, most people had very little concern about who the president was. He was an important person, and if he came to town, you would certainly, drop what you were doing and go see him, but go watch whatever event. But he had very little influence on your life unless you were in the military. So, as much as Bobby, you're absolutely true about the election process being manipulated and controlled. Part of the reason it is because we've allowed so much power to be vested in a president to basically turn him into a king. Okay. Gordy, what are your thoughts on 3 states putting legislation on not sending National Guard troops to war unless there's a declaration of war? So, okay, there's 2 things you have to understand. There are 2 types of militia in this country. You have what federal law refers to as the organized and the unorganized militia. The organized militia, the National Guard, the reserves, they are organized by the state, they are controlled by the state, but the Constitution gives Congress the authority to call up the militia. It doesn't say anything about what reasons they can call them up for. There's very limited information about, there has to be, there's nothing that says there has to be a declaration of war. They can call up the militia to enforce certain laws, to suppress insurrection, but the idea of a state putting forth legislation that says, listen, if you want our militia, you've got to have a constitutional reason. I mean, it has to be done by Congress, not by the president, and it has to be for a constitutionally authorized function for the militia. I like that better than simply saying there has to be a declaration of war. Because yes, Congress has the authority to declare war, but there's no mechanism required for that declaration of war. So when Congress funds the military to take overseas police actions, they're authorizing, when they authorize the military to commit acts of war, they are in effect declaring war, even though they haven't passed legislation that includes the words declaration of war. It's the wording that wording isn't magical. It isn't like, oh, there's no war, there's no war, there's no war. And then all of a sudden Congress passes and says, we declare war, and magically a war appears. War is a conflict between nations. And whether they declare it openly like we did in 1941, or they kind of passively let it happen without a big announcement, they're still authorizing the use of the military. But I do like the idea of states saying, you know, if you're going to call up our militia, it has to be based on constitutional grounds as much as anything else, because that's my whole deal, right? It's the Constitution. Brulio, the sheeple like a nanny state. Well, yeah, they do. But the question is, well, I want to say, there's a movie called My Cousin Vinny. And if you know the movie, there's a scene that basically two kids from New York City end up getting arrested for murder in Alabama. And one of them's cousin named Vinny is this slick, stereotypical New York City guy who's trying to become a lawyer. And he goes down to help them. And he's trying to explain, you know, hey, they're going to show you how great their case is. They're going to show you how, you know, everything's just right. And we've got all this good stuff. What they won't show you is how thin their case is that there's no substance to it. The people of this country, yes, we've gotten fat and lazy and happy being serfs, because we've in some ways because I think we've removed the social stigma of serfdom, because they've been promised goodies and never been shown the cost of those goodies. And again, by cost, I just don't mean money. The trading of liberties, the loss of liberty, the loss of your rights, the loss of privacy. You look at everything that's going on that we have begged, in many cases, begged the federal government to come take our rights. Look at the Democratic presidential candidates. We have people cheering and begging to have their right to choose their own health insurance taken away from them. Think about that for a second. They are begging to have the federal government take away their choice in medical treatment and in funding their medical treatments, which means control of their medical treatment. They are begging to have the federal government take over their health care, their decisions about their health care, about whether or not they get certain treatments, whether or not grandma gets that hip replacement or grandpa gets the cancer treatment. They are going to trade their right to determine for themselves the best treatment for their bodies and for their families with the insane and ridiculously untrue promise that it will be free. It'll not only cost them trillions of dollars, it will cost them their basic liberty. Just look at whatever country has done this and you'll see, yeah, for the common cold and the sprained ankle, it works great. But if you get seriously ill, do you know it's easier to get an MRI for your dog than it is for you in Canada and the United Kingdom? At least that's what I've been told. We don't know the costs of not being responsible. And that's part of why I think it's education. Whatever else people are talking about doing, and some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. I think education has to be at the bottom of it, because unless we show people just how thin that promise is, just how much these programs are going to cost them and their children, in their liberties, in their freedoms, in their ability to do things like say what you want, do what you want, then why not? bread and circuses is fun until you find out what it actually costs. Hard work and effort, yeah. And you know, it is going to take hard work. We spent 150 years going from a free nation into a ruled nation. It's not going to change overnight. No one election is going to change it. No candidate's going to change it. It's going to take people, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort. But let me ask you, is it worth it, not just for you, but for your children and for your grandchildren? See, that's the part that always gets me. I don't do this simply for me. I love doing this, but I have a daughter, and I want my daughter to live in a free country. And hopefully I'll have grandkids one day, and I want them to live in a free country. And I don't want them cursing me because I didn't stand up and protect their freedom when I had the chance. How do we get people engaged who aren't seeing the problem because they don't believe it affects them? Kimberly, well, that's a great question. And I think it's these types of discussions. When I talk to people about things like presidential elections or about different legislation, I think we start looking at what is the liberty that's involved. What are the consequences of these? And really, it's not, I think we have to figure out how to make it less theoretical and more practical. So, for example, when I talk about free healthcare or free education, I say, well, absolutely. It'll just cost you everything you have and every choice you want to make about your healthcare and your education. See, this country is obsessed with choice and autonomy. You show them how they're giving away their autonomy. They're giving away their freedom, their liberty, their ability to make choices about how they will live their lives. And that tends to get people's attention. And I'm hoping I should be interviewed tomorrow for a radio program, but it's how do we start sharing this message of it's not just theoretical. It's not a question of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment or the Fourth Amendment. It's your right to say what you want without being sent to jail, like the gentleman in Martha's Vineyard. Or it's the right to protect yourself. I heard a great story today about a lady who she was divorced. She had I believe that she was divorced, and she was being threatened by her ex-husband, and she was scared, and she went to the police, and the police said, "There's nothing we can do. Get a gun." She literally moved to another state, and he still found her, and he broke into her house. And according to her, she just picked up her gun and started shooting. Now, she didn't hit him, but the last time she saw him was crawling across the front yard on his hands and knees, and she never saw him again. See, that changes it from I have a right to carry an AR-15 into she has a right to defend herself with the best tool possible. We need to figure out, we need to stop making this an academic discussion and really apply it to find something that the person's passionate about, that the person cares about, and show how what these things do infringe on that as well. I saw another article where a gentleman, Google tracked a gentleman when he rode his bike in front of a house that was burglarized, and that made him a suspect. Because a burglary happened, and Google, through an app he had on his phone that was tracking his bike rides, Google told the police, the police probably did a subpoena, they requested data. Google he just freely handed over this data and said, oh, he was out front when this went by. He's now a suspect, or he was a suspect. I don't know the details of the case, because he was being tracked. Because we forget that the Fourth Amendment was written in a time before the internet. And I really personally think it should be updated. We should amend the Fourth Amendment to include things like data and electronic documents and information about us. Not just our papers and property, but information about us needs to be protected from unreasonable search by the government. Make that point. Do you want to be a suspect in a crime simply because you were tracked walking or bicycling or driving in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about making it personal. Pages. Oh, Edda, yes. So there's over at least 500 agencies. There's actually, Edda, there's a great website. It's in one of my papers. I know it's in my book. It's A to Z list of federal agencies. And there's over 600 agencies. And I went through the entire list. Well, first of all, there's a lot of duplicates and some other things, but two very important things came out when I did this research. The first was, according to this conglomeration of federal agencies, each of the states is a federal agency. Now, if you've been with me any amount of time, you recognize the states created the federal government, not the other way around. The states are supposed to boss the federal government, not the other way around. So for the federal government to consider the states as agencies of its power is a serious problem. It's a serious misunderstanding and something that really should be dealt with. And it was something we should deal with whenever we're dealing with our federal representatives, agents, whatever. But here's the other one. When I got rid of the duplicates and I got rid of the states and the other ridiculous one, and I looked at the remaining 600 some odd agencies, and I went through them one by one, I could only find a constitutional reason for about 10% of them to exist. 90% of the executive agencies, I could find no constitutional reason for them to exist, which means they're illegal, which means their power technically is void. Read Federalist 78. Read the opinion of Marbury versus Madison. A legislative act not that is against the Constitution is void. But I keep coming back to this, it's the emperor that has no clothes. We've been taught, we've been indoctrinated. At the age of 5, we take our children, we hand them to the government and say, you teach them. And one of the things they teach them is the government is in charge. And what the government says goes. And the government can tell you what the Constitution that created the government actually means, which to me is kind of insane, but it's how most people think. So yeah, it's pretty shocking, and it's worth educating. Hopefully, I've got I'm working on the cover design of my book. I'm working on the layout of the book. I'm hoping my book is going to be out in another month or two. I want it out by the summer. I want it out before the end of 2019. I had some issues with publishers, but there's some good stuff in there, and I hope Etta and all of you, I hope you'll take a look at that, because I think you'll find more interesting pieces. What has to happen for states to take back their rights at a constitutional level? Is even still possible? What has to happen is, ultimately, we have to elect state representatives with backbone. I give you a perfect example. Kansas passed another Second Amendment protection law. And it reminded me of something. In 2013, Kansas passed the Second Amendment Protection Act, I believe was the name of the law. And it said any firearm accessory, or ammunition manufactured, sold, and retained within the state of Kansas was not subject to the National Firearms Act. And they said any federal officer that attempts to enforce the National Firearm Act on someone who is in possession of material made in Kansas will be arrested and tried. Great. I thought it was a great idea. So these two poor guys, one guy built a suppressor. He did it in Kansas, and it was marked made in Kansas, like the law required. And he sold it to somebody in Kansas. And that suppressor remained in Kansas. And ATF came up and arrested these two gentlemen. And the governor and the attorney general of Kansas did absolutely nothing. Nothing. Sam Brownback. Everyone says, oh, Sam Brownback, great guy. Coward. Because as soon as he had to put his money where his mouth was, as soon as he actually had to stand up for something he said, he folded like a cheap suit. So we need to find better people to represent us. and we need to hold them accountable to their oath of office. And then when they do the right thing, we need to be standing right there with them. You know, when the British marched on Lexington and Concord, when they marched on Lexington Green, it wasn't one guy out there standing, what you're doing is wrong, it's illegal, you shouldn't be doing this. It was a whole group of people. Yes, they were armed, but it was a whole group of people standing with the representatives saying, no, this is too far. We have to be willing to stand with our representatives. I meet with your county sheriff, meet with your reps, let them know that if they do the wrong thing, you will be in their face. But if they do the right thing, you will stand with them. I will bet you if you had asked Sam Brown back in 2014, if he felt like he would be supported if he stood up to the ATF, he'd have said, no, that's our fault. So we have to elect better representatives. We have to recognize they work for us, but we have to stand with them when they're doing the right thing, because people will be coming after them. And if we're not willing to stand up, why would we put them on the front line if we're not willing to back them up? We have to be willing. If you're going to put someone at the middle of the green to stand against the military of Washington, you better be willing to stand there with them. And if you're not, then why are you asking them to stand there in the first place? You got in-laws in Canada, I'll give them a hard pass. Yeah. Lobbyists have made it mostly impossible to counter free healthcare does not have any, you know, Frank, well, yeah, and Frank and everybody here, the best way to deal with bad speech is good speech. The best way to deal with bad information is good information. Is it hard if you don't have a boatload of money? If you don't have a Michael Bloomberg with, you know, billions of dollars, and that he can, you know, he can write a $500 million check and get very little out of it, at least politically. It's hard. But if you look, you were talking, you know, in 1776, we had a ragtag bunch of guys. We had ladies helping them. We had a military that was a joke. We had militias that were basically good old boys that, you know, knew how to shoot and didn't know how to march. And we took on the most powerful military in the world. Why? Because their cause was just and they were willing to fight for it. You know, at the end of the Declaration, the signers' declaration said they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. The siren song of free is strong. But that's why I say what we have to do is take that misinformation, that incomplete information, and fill it out and saying, yes, you can have free healthcare. You just have to give up every choice you have in healthcare. You have to recognize that the federal government will decide whether or not your choice is valid or not. You'll have to submit every choice to the federal government. You complain about getting reimbursed by an insurance company today. What happens when it's the same people that run the VA? You want free healthcare? Go down to a VA and tell me if that's what you want. Now, again, for basic stuff, I understand the VA, they get very good, they get treated very well. But for serious stuff, it is very hard to get treatment. We have to counteract the look it over here. It's the magician's trick, right? Anytime you watch a magician, you never pay attention to what he's showing you or she is showing you, because that's the distraction. The magic is happening. It's over here. It's behind the back. It's the hand he doesn't want you to see. We have to show them the rest of the story. And yeah, right now we're a small ragtag group of people who get up on the internet and we talk about these things. But as long as we have good information and as long as we are winsome in how we show it, don't beat up on the others. People understand they don't know any better. They've been taught by a government education system. They've been indoctrinated to think a certain way. They don't know any better. Our job is not to beat them up. Our job is not to beat them over the head with the fact that they're wrong. Our job is to educate them, to show them, to expose them to information and help them see for themselves what they're being led to. And again, it's not easy. Yeah, and Bobby, I'm sorry to hear that. It is not the only story I've heard about wait times in healthcare. And yeah, that's Canada, which is the type of system I want to put in here. But take a look at the VA. If you want to know what a U.S. federal government-run free healthcare system looks like, look at the VA. And if that's what you want, okay. But don't, if it's such a great deal, this is the part that I always love. If free healthcare, if free education, if free is such a great deal, why do you have to force people to comply? If socialism is such a great deal, if Cuba is so great and the Soviet Union is so great, as Bernie Sanders says, why do we have to force people to participate? Maybe because it's only a great deal for the people on top? Not such a good deal for everyone else? Maybe it's only a great deal if they show you the good parts and they just pay no attention. They do the magician's trick and hide millions of people dead, starvation, no food, lines. We just hide all that. You don't have to look at it. Just look at this little piece over here. Show them the rest of the story. As Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. Tell them the rest of the story. Let's see. Yeah, it's I guess Bobby said he's got a VA card in his pocket and never used it once. And you know what? It's sad. In my point of view, if you served your country, if you sacrificed your body and your soul and your spirit to protect this country, if you were injured physically, mentally, spiritually in the defense of this country should take care of you. I absolutely agree with that. I think it's a shame how we treat especially returning veterans, especially wounded veterans. But to me, it's just more proof that the government isn't the best way to do it. Now, the question then becomes, well, how do you take care of them? Is there a better way? I don't know. I'm sure there is. I may not know all the details of what it is, but I'm willing to try. To me, I would much rather have the VA turn into, okay, here's your VA card and go get the services you need at your local hospital, your local clinic, your local doctor. Let them deal with it and let the government pick up the tab. And the only thing you need, treat it like insurance. The VA to me should be insurance. Get whatever treatment you need. This is what we'll pay for. And that pay for it should be based on, okay, did you serve? No injuries? Okay, that should be a basic plan. Life is good. But if you were injured or somehow or made sick or somehow else injured in the service to your country, anything related to that should be paid for. No question. Here you go. If you need prosthetics, if you need surgery, if you need medication, all you should have to do is take that VA card out of your pocket, head over to your local clinic and say, I need, here's what happened to me. Doctor says, yes, you need an operation. Here's my VA ticket. Is it related to my injury? Yes, here's a VA ticket. They'll pay for it. Get as much bureaucracy out of the system as you can. It should simply be, and that's the one socialized medicine. It's not even socialized medicine. It's just the government paying for the care for people who are injured who have served our country. Will it be inefficient? Absolutely. Nothing the government does is efficient except waste money. But that's what we should be doing, and that's how we should be doing it. Okay. Let's see. I've been on just about an hour now. Hey, this was a great discussion. We've got, it's still a smaller crowd than I would like. Not just an ego stroke, right? I want other people to participate in the discussion because I want them to see that there are answers. And I want other people to recognize that there are answers and there is another way. So anything you can do to help share this message. If you've got a Facebook group, if you've got a website, let me know. I have a system. It requires some settings on your site, but I can take all of my videos and have them broadcast out to your site automatically. Again, CGM, RTI, thank you very much. There's another group that's coming online that will be syndicating my material. Thank you. If you have an opportunity for me to speak to a group, I have a radio station, a radio program, and a podcast that's trying to schedule me. We're trying to fit it into a recording tomorrow. Let me know. I can do in-person events. Obviously, it's easier if it's in Middle Tennessee, but I can do these events online. And while not as good as an in-person event, these are certainly great ways to get information out. And to have, and by the way, the online events, I can also make them more interactive, where different people can talk and ask questions and not simply type in the chats. We can do a lot of that stuff. Most of all, as difficult as it is, as frustrating as it can be, I do ask you to be considerate, be winsome, recognize these aren't bad people. They're just uninformed. And the best way to inform them is to do so winsomely, to not beat them up and call them names like I get called, but to show them the errors of their argument, to give them facts and information, to show them the real cost of what it is they're talking about. And then kindly, lovingly show them the truth. And then be willing to stand with them and help them as hopefully they start learning, oh, now that I've learned this, what's the next thing I can learn? So that, yeah, Kimberly, it's anything dealing with the Second Amendment, anything dealing with weapons and arms, there's an emotional reaction, and those types of stories, the types of stories where everyone focuses on the stories of, oh, we got to get guns and someone used a gun and someone used a gun. The information about how often guns and other arms are used in self-defense, I think the number is as much as 1,000 to 1. The number of times a firearm is used in self-defense to protect a life as it is used to illegally take a life. So there's a lot we can do. And Kimberly, you've already started talking. You've had me at one of your events. I appreciate that. I'm here as a resource. I can write material. I can share the material. I can speak to your groups. If you need help sharing this information, please let me know. If you can at all support the work that I'm doing, like I said, when the book comes out, when the class comes out, the insider group comes out, please, the support helps. I'm trying to get as much material as I can to as many hands as I can, and helping to pay for things like hosting and computing resources and other materials. Well, that can help. So, all of those who will, if you're able to help, if all you can do is share this material, I'm happy. If you can help other ways, I would really appreciate that. I am glad to see we had a lot more interaction than we have in the last few months. I will see you again next month, right here at the Constitution Study. Keep an eye on the Facebook page. I will let you know what the topic is as soon as I figure it out. And I'll try to put out a video reminder as well, so it gets syndicated to all the different pages so everybody catches up. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a good night. Thanks again, and I want to see you here the next time I'm up on the Constitution Study.